Last year, I confronted Heizo Takenaka, the former Japanese finance minister, over why he handed over control of the Japanese financial system to a group of American and European oligarchs. He and his envoy told me that it was because Japan had been threatened by an earthquake machine. I did not believe it at the time. However, when I started exposing some of their doings, I was told by the Japanese security police that because of what I had said on places like rents.com, that Niigata City was going to be hit by an earthquake. 2 days later, Japan's largest nuclear reactor was the exact epicenter of 2 earthquakes, both 6.8 in magnitude. And that was too much of a coincidence for me. So I started doing research and found out about HAARP, H-A-A-R-P. And I realized that they really did know how to make earthquakes. And they do it by shooting a billion-watt microwave into the ionosphere, which is the part of the atmosphere that has a lot of energy in it. That pushes the ionosphere up into outer space, and then it rebounds. And the way it rebounds can cause earthquakes. Just like an opera singer can break a glass by singing at a certain level, or by dragging your fingernails on a blackboard, you feel a weird sensation. If they adjust the vibration for the rock underneath their target site, they can do that. The same machine can also heat up subterranean water to cause earthquakes. And remember, a billion-watt microwave. What does microwave do to water? It heats it up. Now imagine if you put 1 billion watts into a tropical storm. You could make it much bigger, and you could change the direction it flows in. You know how there's high pressure zones and low pressure zones. Well, high is hot and low is cold. And the hot flows into the cold. And vice versa when there's more of the cold. So they can heat up an area and cause it to flow into a next door area. In other words, these people are capable of creating the cyclone that hit Myanmar, the tsunami that hit Indonesia, and the earthquake that hit China. Now, after the earthquakes hit Niigata, a member of the Inagawa crime family, which is based in around the U.S. Yokosuka Air Base, and members of the Inagawa family have told me that their big boss is George Bush Sr. In other words, they work for Skull and Bones. And they invited me to a so-called UFO gathering where they showed me the video of this blob. They told me it was a UFO, but it was obviously, to me anyway, a plasma.
Super Full Moon, presented by Science at NASA. Mark your calendar. On March 19th, a full moon of rare size and beauty will rise in the east at sunset. It's a super perigee moon, the biggest in almost 20 years. The last full moon so big and close to Earth occurred in March of 1983, says Jeff Chester of the U.S. Naval Observatory in Washington, D.C. I'd say this is worth a look. Full moons vary in size because of the oval shape of the moon's orbit. It is an ellipse, with one side, perigee, about 50,000 kilometers closer to Earth than the other, apogee. Nearby perigee moons are about 14% bigger and 30% brighter than lesser moons that occur on the apogee side of the moon's orbit. The full moon of March 19th occurs less than 1 hour away from perigee, a near-perfect coincidence that happens only once every 18 years or so, says Chester. A perigee full moon brings with it extra-high perigean tides.
I wanna do, 'cause I find for someone just like you, make me feel the way you do. Never, never gonna give you up. I'm never, ever gonna stop. Not the way you feel about you, girl. I just can't live without you.
Hi. Wow. Never seen the moon that big.
Yeah. We really shouldn't waste it. Bedroom?
5 minutes. I'll be out in a minute.
Don't rush yourself. Sometimes anticipation can heighten the pleasure. It's a funny thing about pleasure. It can be quite pleasurable.
In international news, Japanese relief workers are staging a desperate effort to rescue hundreds of people stranded by a freak tidal wave that hit Kitamoto City. Scientists say the tsunami may have been caused by what they're describing as unusual lunar activity. More on this as it develops.
You know, take a look at this. This is what they call the ring of fire for earthquakes. See how a series of quakes that started in Chile, then went over to New Zealand, and then hit Japan, will keep following this ring. It actually leads to the U.S. West Coast, so could that be next? Here's a fellow who says it could be. With me now is Jim Birkeland. Jim is a geologist who, don't scoff at this guy, he predicted the 1989 World Series quake, and he did so days before it happened. He's back with us now. Jim, very good to have you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. This is rather a critical time.
Indeed. Jim, you said you noticed the unusual events prior to these big events, and one is all these dead fish popping up, particularly off the California coast, that is a pattern that you see prior to quakes. Could you explain that?
That's the type of thing that does happen fairly routinely. Animals often anticipate upcoming quakes mainly due to the changes of the magnetic field that precede quakes, and is often found right after a big solar flare causes northern lights. The animals orient themselves like homing pigeons. I used to raise them. And dogs and cats will flee homes, change their normal feeding patterns. Wild animals will come into cities. There are many, many clues out there, and so many of my colleagues have just ignored such factors and believe all truth comes out of a black box.
But you're
now,
saying these anomalies,
yeah.
the same anomalies you saw back at the time of the California quake at '89, you're seeing being repeated now, particularly off the California coast. But others say, well, these are anomalies that happen all the time, and he's focusing in on this to tie it into something that might not happen. What do you say?
Well, before the World Series quake, I knew we were going to have, on the 14th of October, the highest tidal force in 3 years, with the full moon and the close approach of the moon at the same day, or 5 days apart in that case. Similar to happened to the quake at Loma Prieta in 1865, under identical conditions, October of 1865. And 3 years prior to the World Series quake, we had even higher tides at the end of the year in '86, and I gave talks to scientific organizations and business organizations and said we should have a quake of about 4.5 or so within the next time towards New Year's. And I was leaving for work, and the quake hit.
Well, what are you seeing now, and when do you see it then, Jim?
Well, I see the highest tidal force until the year 2016 coming up on the 19th of this month. This is what I call a seismic window, and I've been calling it like a seismic window since 1974.
That would be Saturday. That would be Saturday.
Yes, and the next day is the equinoctial tides, the time of the full moon, and the equinox, the first day of the of spring. Now it's interesting that you showed the Ring of Fire in 1906. The Japanese seismologist Omori said, you know, we had a couple of big quakes in 1897 in southern Alaska, and then just a few days ago in the March of 1906, they had this great earthquake in South America. The next time it looks like it would be due to fill the gap in Mexico, or more likely in California. And he made that talk in about the 10th of April in 1906. And sure enough, the quake happened. And I've got so many stories now of animals and people that
just weirding out, doing
anticipated the quake.
Okay, Jim, we're going to watch closely.
And so right now,
go ahead, finish that thought.
Well, just say that the Northwest U.S. is in a great under the gun, as I had called us in 1989.
Wow.
And Southern California, you know, they just had an unusual fish wash ashore. The same thing is called a earthquake fish in Japan.
All right, we'll watch closely, Jim. I think people should pay attention because of your history. You've been right about this. Jim Birkeland, thank you very, very much.
My pleasure. I'd hope.